What we were asked to look at is obviously how we can provide improvement, input into the development of this mentorship program, pilot program, and how we can engage activists more readily.
So we started our discussion by looking at language and being mindful of the language that we actually use. And we talked about the word activist and the word activism, and what do these words mean? And they do have different meanings to different people. And so some people might find the word activist a bit off-putting. They might not be able to identify that. So we just need to look at perhaps reframing our language. Another word that we identified was the word militant, and this is a word that's often used to describe blue-collar unions. And again, this is a very masculine word, so that might be another word that we might want to avoid because we don't want to put people off becoming involved. We also talked about what does activism look like, and it looks like different things to different people. Some people are very physically active. They'll go out to rallies and that sort of thing, but then there's a different kind of activism developing now through social media. We then went on to a discussion about what are the other groups out there making noise at the moment. They might be making loud noise, or they might be diligently working in the background. And perhaps we need to identify who those groups are. For example, one of the groups is the Women Leadership in Economics group, which has just been established. There's a Women in Engineering group. There are other social justice groups on the different campuses. So maybe we need to come up with a list of discipline-specific focused groups that are currently meeting and coming together around common issues. And so again, what are the common interests between all of us? You know, we have unions and we have social justice groups, but there are common issues that affect all of us, and maybe we need to come together around those issues. And then how do we get people on board? Well, we talked about winning people over one conversation at a time. Let's not think big picture, let's take small steps. And that I used to be a union organiser, and that one-on-one conversation and contact is probably the most important work that you can do in getting people on board with unions. So we talked about, okay, so let's do some activities. How do we come together? What are the activities we can do? And we need to be really conscious of not being exclusive. We need to be really inclusive around the activities that we come together around. Sometimes, there might be, union member-only meetings. So we don't want to exclude people like that, because it's those activities when you come together that you then have those opportunities to network and do those one-on-one conversations. And so that person might come in not being a union member, but they might leave considering becoming a union member. In terms of the structures, there was a discussion around, people come into these official roles, but they really don't understand what the expectations are of them, what the role entails. So we maybe need to do some work around explaining the different roles. What does a delegate do? What does a branch official do? And it's just giving some people a bit of a clearer picture about what those expectations might be of you if you decide to take on one of those roles. We talked about other activities, social events, in the context of peer networks. So maybe we need to look at what kind of social events we can do that, again, don't exclude people. So if you talk about drinks after work or dinner, we need to consider that, again, many women have responsibilities and they may not be able to get to those types of events. So we need to look at other ways that we can meet. And we talked about And this is a real challenge. It's not just a challenge for this union, it's a challenge for all unions and how they get their members together. And so maybe we need to look at some other unions and what they're doing to try and overcome this issue. So how will we measure success? Well, obviously we'd have more people in leadership positions, we'd have more delegates on the ground, and an active network of a broad range of people sharing information and stories and campaigning together on those common issues. And then we got a bit radical and we talked about the branch elections that are coming up in October in 2018, and perhaps we need to be bold and put up a motion about women's equal representation nationally in the union, and also talked about a dedicated committee member. And lastly, we want our particularly our delegates to be confident in what they're doing. And so we talked about delegate training, this is, in my own experience, it's a really valuable thing. The ASU, they have 3-day training, delegate training, and they run it several times a year. You can get trade union training lead for that training. And it just is a really great way to start as a delegate in a union. You come together with a range of different people from different backgrounds, and you can share stories and experiences. And it just gives people the resources and the skills and the tools to be able to go out there and have those one-on-one conversations. We need to consider that the Australian Council of Trade Unions have a training centre, and we have some very, very skilled, fantastic women educators in South Australia who run these sessions. So we should look at bringing them on board as well.
One of the things I'll just comment on further to what Jodie and the group talked about was having some transparency or clearer transparency around what each of the positions entail. What is the role of a delegate? What is the role of a branch committee member, etc., the WAC committee member in each division. One of the things that we've actually spoken about at the recent Women's Action Committee was generating some of these profiles, position descriptions, so that people were much clearer about what opportunities existed for activism. So I think that's one way we can certainly address identification recruitment.
One of the things that we thought was that, and echoes what's already been said, but that Fidelma spoke about her experience of working in unions, and that doesn't seem to be that there's necessarily an issue with recruitment and tapping on the shoulder necessarily, but that it's once you're in that it's that process that is missing of mentoring and support and supporting women to rise up the ranks. Also acknowledgement that different unions are all different. So depending on the union that you're involved in, you know, the processes and protocols and what was termed secret men's business will be different throughout. So finding your way can be quite daunting. Yeah, there's an assumption that you should kind of know what the deal is within a union. So I think that ties in with that transparency of understanding what the different roles are and knowing what are the different options. I think a lot of the fear around getting more involved is that you'll suddenly be completely swamped and be expected to be out there as full-time union activist, rather than thinking about it as, okay, what are the little bits that I can do? And so I think actually that just thinking smaller about individual conversations is really something I'll take away from this today. So a mentorship program from the start. So I think, it's just validation of what you're doing. It would be really great to have mentoring as soon as people sign up for the union or put their hand up to be involved. We found that across the unis and within different schools, there are quite different experiences of whether or not you feel able to be visible or whether union members are visible or invisible. So there are certain disciplines that you might think lend themselves to, feeling safe in that environment, and that being a union member can be it's almost expected. It's almost a problem if you're not, because the shame of not being a union member. Whereas then you move, some of us who've moved into different disciplines, it can be quite different, and the experience of not knowing who your allies are can be quite difficult. So sorry to pick you out, Eileen, but Eileen Willis, for both Fidelma and I, has been fantastic to have somebody who's high up as a professor to see someone who is actually a union member, to counter some of that narrative that we have around union membership being bad for your career. So I think visibility is a really big issue, and naming yourself as a union member is really powerful for other people and those around you. We talked, so the second point, having really supportive peer networks is essential. And again, we talk more about our own experiences rather than actually what we would like to see. But certainly where there are supportive peer networks, where there's individualised attention on skill development. So obviously the same situation is not going to be right for everyone. So working with individuals who are coming in to union roles and asking them what they need, or being able to identify what individuals need specifically, rather than seeing everyone as all new activists all need the same, was really important. Obviously, there's a part of self-advocacy which is important, so fostering our ability to advocate for ourselves. We talked a lot about education, and that particularly with younger members coming in, that there needs to be more education about the history of the unions. Obviously the role of the unions in processes like the EB. I think there are lots of people who actually don't understand that the unions are so key for negotiating our terms of employment. Then we talked about language, and a similar discussion really about naming and whether to temper the message, how we need to temper our message to suit the audience, but how instinctively we hold so much of this so dearly and so passionately that we can feel really uncomfortable about changing the language that we use, because why should we have to change the language that we use? So we talked a lot about that's the thing we really need to do potentially, is look at the audience that we're wanting to talk to and strategise with the language that we use, and at the same time acknowledge that that's really hard for a lot of us, and we also had lots of interesting discussion around feminism, actually using the term women and whether or not that's inclusive enough, and thinking about bringing other groups on board, and where our alliances are, and the role that language plays with all that. Data is powerful, so having the data that we've seen today is really we felt was really powerful, to be able to go to women in academia and say, look, this is what you're faced with, in order to then motivate action. We thought that was quite useful. We decided that we probably did need some marketing around feminism, around activism, so similar, I guess, in terms of that same thing of pitching the message. So specific targeted materials, but and recognising that we have a diversity of union membership, and that within the women in unions there is a lot of diversity as well. Evaluation of success. It's not necessarily a recruitment issue that there's not enough women getting involved in unions, but that again success would be achieved when there are more women in leadership positions, when there's parity. And I think it sounded as though this had been said a couple of times, but the idea that those roles needed to have term limits, so that branch committee roles, presidential, taking that presidential model of having 2 terms would be a good proactive step. Also, an acknowledgement that there are some fantastic policies and materials that have been developed already, particularly the sort of training materials that I think Helen has been involved in producing, but that potentially they're not getting translated into practice. So thinking about the frequency of training and how often training happens would be useful. And then we asked, what does it all look like? That was our question. So what will it all look like? We're not really sure yet.
I think what was particularly, well, perhaps it's just my point of view, others might have different in the group, was this issue about the role model. And the example was given of the professor, maybe head of school, who reveals that she is a union member, and it's a good thing to be a union member. And in fact, this recent example where the recruitment trainers came and they were spoken to the head of school, who was a union member, who then agreed, yes, I'm happy for the recruiter to come and speak to my staff. So obviously that's not going to be the ideal in all situations, but I think what's important is for us to show through senior women, professional and academic in the university, who are prepared to put their hands up either at meetings or in our written communications to say, I'm a proud union member and I've been a proud union member for 20 years, 5 years, and there's been no effect on my career and blah, blah, blah. Because I think it's very important to show the role models out there. Because that's, in many respects, that's the best way people actually think, I can do that. That person's doing that. I've got those same sort of skills. If they can do it, I can do it. So I think that's a very important thing.
Meshing with issues that are around the university, and I think that's close to that one that talked about other women's groups on campus. So, being part of student movement issues, supporting other union issues within the legislation, going to rallies that support other unions. And then in terms of mentoring, was making sure that if you are a mentor, that part of your mentoring is making it clear to the person who's the mentee that when they become president, there's an expectation that they're ethical. Right, so in a sense, that's very much part of the education. How you measure success, membership and outcomes.